Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on a Monday, on a weekday, because usually our events happen on weekends. So thank you. And this is one of a kind for us as well, because one, it's on today's discussion is on Sattriya, and the other we are having a scholar and a practitioner for the first time together. So, and I take great pleasure in welcoming Arshiya ji and Dr. Anwesa Mahanta for agreeing to be a part of our discussion today. A little bit about us and our work before we get into the discussion itself. Arinyani, I'm Mahalakshmi Prabhakar, and together with my colleague Arinyani Bhargav, we started this platform called Re-Cognising Dance for the discussion on to discuss all aspects of Indian art forms and Indian dance, and to bring all perspectives together. And we began sometime last year, and we've had our discussions initially were restricted to Bharatanatyam, and we started what was called the scholar series, inviting scholars like Saskia Person-Boom, Dr. Amrit Srinivasan, Professor Matthew Allen, Professor Frederick, and soon we expanded our discussions to more than Bharatanatyam, and we invited scholars from other classical art forms such as Odissi, Kathak, and now we have a discussion on Sattriya as well. Other than the scholar series, we also do a series called Discouraged, where we discuss the problems that plague Bharatanatyam, not dancers of today, be it Bharatanatyam or contemporary or any dance form. And we also have our newsletter launched sometime earlier this year. We call it Revisit. We've also been doing workshops on Indian dance forms, the history of Indian dance forms, more specifically Bharatanatyam for children. And this is briefly what we do. And over to Arinyani to introduce the event, and we'll get into the event essentially.
Thank you, Maha. So actually, we'll actually just dive straight into the event because Maha, I don't know if you realize, but you already introduced the event as well just before. No, but that's great work for me. Yeah, so of course, today is a discussion on Sattriya, and we'll get into the pronunciation of the word as well very soon. And we have with us Dr. Arshiya Sethi and Dr. Anwesa Mahanta, and both of them have done extensive research on this dance form, and it is one of the dance forms that is, in my view, the least known about and discussed very little, at least amongst the mainstream dance circles. So we're very excited to have both Anwesa and Arshiya here today with us to discuss and help us to understand more about this form and the socio-cultural, political kind of context within which this form has existed, how it has evolved, and to also get their perspectives as people who write about the dance form as well as from someone who actually practices it. So welcome, Dr. Arshiya Sethi. Welcome, Dr. Anwesa Mahanta. Very, very happy to have you here. And we will dive straight into the first question, and that is for Anwesa. So let's just start with the right at the beginning and the basics. Could you begin by telling us about the dance form Sattriya? What is its history, its antiquity and trajectory, and how is it linked to the practices of ritual in Satras and its links with monastic life?
First and foremost, thank you so much, Arinyani and Mahalakshmi. And also, it's an honor to be sharing the same platform with Arshiya, whom I respect so much. And we have been sharing our works, and it's been a long association. So also, my heartfelt congratulations to both of you for creating this space, because this is indeed a need of the hour where we need to discuss more about dance traditions, and that's where newer understandings would evolve. So coming straight to your question, the question itself can become a thesis. So such is we have so much to share in that.
I'm
But
aware. Apologies.
yeah, but yes, I'll just try to share in a nutshell. So we know that every dance tradition, we have it, it has its own history. So Hotria dance takes us to the Bhakti resurgence in Assam, which started in 15th, 16th century, and it was led by the great saint poet, preacher, social reformer, practitioner, Srimanta Honkordev. But just before I move on to my to answering your question, I would like to refer here that I would be pronouncing as Sattriya, but locally we pronounce it as Hotria. Even my name is Onneha. Assam is pronounced as a hom. So this ho sound is very special, but for a larger discussion and understanding, I would be referring to the term Sattriya. Now, coming back to your question. So it takes us back to a Bhakti resurgence in Assam started by the great saint poet Srimanta Honkordev. Now, when we talk about the Bhakti movement, it itself encapsulates so much because it had such multiple dimensions. It evolved, it moved beyond the religious portals of a movement, and then flourished as a social movement, and then became also an artistic movement. So when we refer to 15th, 16th century Assam, it involved a huge amount of multiple dimensions of arts, multiple activities. And here, that's why I see that entire period with a kind of engagement which Saint Poet had conceptualized, engagement of intellect and body, and where there has been a constant celebration of thoughts that evolved from the Bhagavata faith, centering around the principal doctrine of Bhagavata Purana. So celebration of thought, celebration of action, and celebration of body. So in his writings, I always like to quote this. This is one of my favorite quotes because Saint Poet himself in his writings mentioned, Itu hori rote ase oneko mohima, your body holds such potential. So this body itself became one of the powerful mediums to spread about the Bhakti faith. And when I said that it also is one of the powerful artistic movement in a sense, because this movement shaped the first artistic step in the entire Bhakti resurgence of Assam, that is the Ankya Bhavana. So Ankya Bhavana was the initial step. Ankya Bhavana, when we refer to it, it's a traditional theater form, Sattriya theater form, where itself we get to see a composite of music, dance, and theater. And dance plays a very important role because every scene between the two characters, the dialogues, the entry, exit, everything, the war sequence or the sutradhar, everything gets connected through dance. So dance definitely played a very important role. Now, taking a cue of that through Ankya Bhavana, it also gives space to a lot more other art forms to emerge, like the craft tradition, because to decorate the space, weaving also came to the portal because you need to decorate the space, you need costume, and then crafts, masks. Then along with that, gradually we get to see that with the cue of Ankya Bhavana, with such huge amount of dance compositions, gradually dance became and took shape as an independent wing. And that's where his principal apostle, Sri Madhav Deva, he had taken this initiative, and in Borpeta, while creating Rangariha, he had staged Salinas. So Sali means against, it replicates the grace of the feminine energy. So this is where again the entire beauty of Sali emerged, and from that gradually the discourses of Hotria. So now we are talking Sattriya. The discourses of Sattriya gradually, it started happening, and then the same poet had thought about or conceptualized about the Sattriya institution. So Satra, with the concept of Satra institution, the whole notion of institutionalization of arts happened. Now, when I say institutionalization of arts, it is not something which is a separate unit from the society, but very much a part of a societal unit. So Satra is when it got shaped with the later apostles, we see the whole functioning of the society, whole functioning of this institution, along with the societal, actions. So this is what it makes the whole art form, the journey of the art form going together along with the society. So arts and society took a very organic shape, and the whole ecology. When we say, I always some of my papers also I have referred to the social ecology of arts. So whole social ecology of arts took shape with the entire formation of Satra within the larger, periphery of the society. Now, when the Satras got structured, it had multiple roles. One, definitely, it started preserving the dance numbers which was introduced, and then gradual proliferation of arts. So from a single dance number, today we have a huge vocabulary of dance numbers, and that's because of the contribution of these great masters. At another level, also, which we'll be talking in a later part, the whole an art could proliferate, art emerges, or art finds its space with gradual performance space. So within the Hotra itself, the Namghar, where the art forms, the dance forms, theater, music, all these, when they are staged continuously as a ritual, that made it a mandate for all the practitioners to constantly think and engage with the arts. So there has been a 24/7 engagement of arts, and that the first thing which I said, the whole concept of bhakti as celebration of thoughts, celebration of action, and celebration of body. All these things have been maintained through in a very systematic way in the Hotras. So there was a proper grammatical way which was introduced so that the young generation can also learn. So the whole teaching methodology was formed. And today, when we speak about the entire history, taking its past and its present, even today, the Hotra plays a very major role as a guardian. Because unless and until today we are talking about, or we are discussing this living history of Hotria, and it makes it so unique only because it's also sharing a space as a ritual. So it shares a very interesting, root in the entire, a very interesting gati with a lot of twists and turns in the historical path, but it shares this interesting space of secular and ritual platform together. So this makes this art form a very unique in its own way, and that itself says how much the role the Satras had played in the entire functioning of this art form and making it as a social reality for the Assamese community, rather than as something, distant past. But it's very much a lived experience. Sattriya is a lived experience for all of us.
Thank you so much. And actually, hearing you speak, it was very clear what you said.
I was just telling Aranyani that it was so clear.
Yeah. And also, I think after hearing you speak, I feel like you should just say
Hotria.
Hotria?
It sounds so good. Yeah.
We'll try,
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Say it like it is. It's for us to learn what the correct pronunciation is. Yeah. All right, Maha, over to you for the next question.
Actually, I think it quite leads me to the next question to Dr. Arshiya, because Anwesa just told us how unique it is, and this interests me because Arshiya ji has been involved with so many different art forms, be it or as a critic, and different over the many years of experience. So, but how, what according to you, Arshiya ji, is unique aspect, is unique to Sattriya, and how did you come about choosing Sattriya for your doctoral study and research, and why is it unique?
Oh, this is very interesting for me. Thank you so much, Maha, for this question. And Aranyani and Mahalakshmi, I must add my words to congratulate you for creating this wonderful forum. It's been a pleasure anticipating this talk, and here we are finally after the many conversations that we had. And I'm happy to be here with my favorite person in Sattriya, with whom I have shared so many levels of association that it's hard to explain, but we sort of slip in for each other very well for over many years now. I think at least 20, 21 years. Anwesa was a very little girl when I first met her. Let me just put it like this. And today when she talked about the craft traditions of the Sutras, I just wanted to mention that this piece of jewelry that I'm wearing is actually something that was made in the Sutras. So this is the kind of craft tradition that you have. You have bell, you have metal, you have woodwork, you have masks. The masks tradition is just stunning, you know. So, and it involves a lot of bamboo work preparing it. So the second thing I wanted to mention, I don't think, Anwesa, you explained why we have this whole issue about her Kshatriya and Sir Sattriya, as we have been saying, is because the essay in Assamese is the guttural velar fricative according to the International Phonetic Association, where the essay is pronounced like a KH, K sound, or just to explain it better for you, Bach, B-A-C-H, the C-H like that, Loch Ness Monster and all that. So if we are going with Kshatriya, I will try, but when you write it, you put an X. So I deliberately chose not to write it even in my thesis, although I was present, my external examiner was a Assamese lady, and so many X's, it would have been a delight for any Scrabble person, you know, so many X's coming into it. So your question to me was, what is unique about Sattriya? I'm staying Sattriya, it's settled on me, you know. So the most unique thing about Sattriya is that of the 8 classical dance forms, this is the only one which has a birthday. 15th November 2000, no other dance form has a birthday. This one does have a birthday. And that will link to I'll link this fact to my later, when I talk later about political part of my explorations. But first, the unique aspects that you do. Anwesa also said it is a living dance tradition. And it lives in 2 completely different cartographies, as a ritual in a sacred space and as entertainment in a secular space. This creates a certain dynamic dichotomy and a little tension in the 2 aspects of Sattriya. And we find people struggling to sort of fit between the 2, including when you call Satra artists, monks, onto the stage, they don't know whether it's monk look or can they be something else. Let me give you an example of that. So in the Satra, you always cover your head and you cover your body. You don't come out bare-bodied. So even in very beautiful forms, they will wear a transparent sort of a jacket to allow the body forms to show, but it will never be a sort of a bare-bodied presentation. But when they come onto the stage and they see all the non-Satra people or all the other artists, Bharatanatyam artists and all, dancing without sort of a covered body, they do get tempted. So these are some of the issues that one encounters in a real life practice. Now, because the dance form is on a secular stage in one case and in a spiritual stage, right away, there's a conflict of agendas. And maybe it's a very severe word, but in my writing, I have said it compels Sattriya to live a schizophrenic existence. Okay, so that's a word. Maybe it's a little excessive. I agree with you, but it does create a problem. Now, the next thing is when it comes to how I feel that Sattriya has a special position when it comes to classical dances. So as both of you are classical dancers and so is Anwesa, I'm sure everything that I'm going to say now is no surprise for you. What makes a dance classical? Now, even Kapila Vatsyayan, who is like the doyen, it's a big question. What makes a dance classical? I have subsequent questions to it. Who decides that a dance is classical? Who has that kind of capacity to be able to decide? So in her writings, Kapila Vatsyayan has written that if a dance has very close links with other art forms, if it is linked with the text, if it has stayed sort of fixed for a while, then it can make a claim. There is no definite answer. And one or the other issue is always the reason why some dances do not get called classical. Chow, for instance. But Sattriya got called classical. And it's really strange because, yes, Sattriya deserves to be called classical because it is a 500-year spectrum that is largely unbroken, only subject to organic changes. You know, there was never a complete break in the case of Sattriya. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is that the definite links with other art forms, some she has referred to already, and music and things. But I must qualify, there is no link to sculpture. There is some tiny link to painting, but no link to sculpture in the case of a Sattriya. Then if you look at continuity, as I said, it's an unbroken tradition. So probably Sattriya may be the most true blue of dance forms to be called classical. And yet it was not for so many years. How many years? In 1958, the first call to make Sattriya classical gets articulated. But Sattriya gets recognized only on the 15th of November, 2000. So are we really sure that we are talking about what exactly constitutes classical? Because here was this unbroken tradition and it was never not deemed to be classical for 42 years. You're waiting for it to be called classical. Then the Sattriya dance and text link. Don't go looking for a Natya Shastra everywhere. In the case of Sattriya, there is no written text of the dance as such. Dance is texted in two places, in memory and on the body and its DNA and its muscles and things like that. Okay, so we do use texts in Sattriya, but they are poetic texts of religious origin, or they are part of the play text. But you depend on memory for the dance movement. Okay, so parampara is that which is the best that goes forward. So memory forgets, but it retains that which is the best. So don't tell me that what happened in 1494 or 1500, let's just take a safe date, is the same that happens today. And so it's an unchanged tradition. No, it must have changed, as in parampara. But don't go looking for a text. You're not likely to find that text. And certainly not a classical text. Now, in Sanskrit, this is very important to understand that because for other dances, they've been able to make, in a backward reading, this complete link with Natya Shastra. And because of the politics of nomenclature, in the case of Bharatnatyam, the fact that Sadhar gets called Bharatnatyam means that you have staked a claim to the Natya Shastra, you've established an antiquity, and you have decided to declare yourself the national form with that. So it was a backward reading. Many classical dance forms have regional texts, for instance, Abhinay Chandrika, Balaram Bharatam, and all that. Sattriya does not have a regional text. A text, one copy of which was discovered in one satra, dusty and moldy. It was never used. I don't know about Anwesa's experience, but in the hundreds of interviews that I conducted, no reference was ever made as to a living and vibrant link with this particular text. And the text is only a hand gesture text, and that too a limited hand gesture text. So I would go to the extent of saying, please don't look for a Natyashastra type text in it. There doesn't exist such a text. The texts of Sattriya, which is the poetry texts or the religious texts, don't use Sanskrit extensively. They mostly play out in Assamese or in a braiding of 3 languages: Assamese, Brajavali, and a smattering of Sanskrit. So she mentioned the Sutradhar. For the opening Nandis and Bhattimas and the closing Mukti Mangal shloks and the words of the Sutradhar, Sanskrit is used, but it is a very small part. And there is a reason for this, because of the fact that when the Bhakti movement comes, one of the main importance is that it comes in polyphony of voices, and these are regional voices. And so all Bhakti literature of Assam is mostly in Assamese. So again, don't try and look for a Sanskritized version. And this is something that happened after the recognition. Everybody started looking for Sanskrit terminologies and nomenclatures. Whereas if you looked at the terminologies in use, in prevalence, they described the local environment. So for instance, you had a step that was called the wagtail step, or another step which crisscrossed the feet, and that was called the boar step, But now suddenly you're looking for, what are the words from the Sanskrit Natyashastra or some other text that you can use? I thought that was quite an unnecessary process. So these are some of the unique aspects of it. I want to mention something else, that the Satra, and Anwesa has already underlined it, is a very important imagination landscape in which the dance, which has come out from the theater tradition, has been nurtured. If you take away the Satras or the denizens of the Satras, you do a huge disservice to the form, because not notated and living in memory and approved and peer reviewed by memory, it can get into troublesome areas of anything goes by the way of Sattriya. And unlike many other art forms, Sattriya is in the Shabad Kirtan tradition, by which I mean a human agency product. It doesn't say that it's coming from divine anything. It just is a human agency product, and it throughout tries to create the human agency aspect alive. So when it does its stagecraft, it uses pyrotechnics and all that to give it a larger than life thing, but it's always human agency. And fine theatrical roots, I have already mentioned to you. Yeah, there are 2 registers of the dance form in the Satras also. The register where the dance is part of the theater tradition, and you have then little bits of it, as she said, Yuddha Nach, Samvad dances, interactions and all that. Or you have that dance, which is not linked to the theater tradition at all, but is part of the ritual and is performed either on a daily basis, in orality, or on periodic basis as the cultural calendar of the Satras demands you to perform it. Now, this orality aspect is why it sort of, it could escape and get away from the written tradition form. It is remembered every day. It is remembered 24/7. Who are the practitioners in the Satras? They are the monks, but they are not monks that are detached from the rest of the world. These are farmer dancers, farmer monks. They are, they have an engagement with the world. This is when they lead celibate lives, and they have food restrictions and touch and non-touch purity restrictions. They have a lot of restrictions, but they manage to be, again, a point that Anwesa had raised, socially interactive with the entire community. So as they farm, as they do whatever they do, through 24/7, they are singing, they are playing the khol, they are remembering the mnemonics of the khol. And this remembering is very important, because the way the rhythm is played out in Sattriya is musically. So you are singing out the rhythm. That's why you are singing out the rhythm all the time. I mean, it's with you, you live with it. When you take yourself away from this 24/7, the memory may become a little weaker and you will stand to lose much more than you have sort of anticipated. What else would I like to tell you about thing? Anything else that I could say? Yeah.
I think
For the moment, this is good enough. One little thing I just want to tell you, that there is no, while I talked about purity and impurity being part of their lives, you know, touch and not touch, hos na ke furra is the word that they use. Have you had a bath? Hos. Remember the word hoskas? Have you had a bath? Are you with water or are you not with water, kind of a thing? So despite that, they were very inclusive and embracive, and the words that you find used in the Sutras, including for the dance or the costume tradition, come from many languages, including Persian. Just quickly, Pagor, the Chapkan, which is a variant of the Achkan, and the Mujra Hasta, that lovely circular movement, hand gesture that the Sattriya dancers make, that is Mujra, you know, that thing. So let's leave it at this for the moment. Bhakti is the pradhan rasa. That doesn't mean that the other rasas don't exist, but they always come filtered through bhakti, which also means that there's a certain gravitas to the performance. Now, the problem is when you bring it to the stage, it is not always gravitas oriented. Sattriya dancer ki jo nazar hoti hai, the way the Sattriya dancer looks gives the dancer away completely. These are the unique aspects of it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Arshiya. That was quite a long list of why this
yes
form is unique. And I mean, I don't know if I'm correct, but I was telling Maha that you know, I mean, even the fact that ritual and secular, you know, they both kind of exist at the same time today. If in Bharatnatyam the temple dancing had not been banned, maybe Bharatnatyam would have had that dual existence as well, you know. Speaking
yes
of dual existence, Anwesa, this is a question for you. Because Sattriya, Kshatriya, did I say that right?
Not ko.
Kshatriya.
Yeah.
Lives a dual life as you know, in a ritual as well as a secular space, as a performance. What are the challenges that you have faced as a practitioner?
First and foremost, Aranyani, I never think that it's a challenge. You know, the entire presence of Hotra itself, you know, gives us the identity, and that's why we are here as Hotriya and speaking about the entire tradition of arts. So it has never been a challenge. The only thing is that here again, because all the guiding principles have been shown by the Hotra itself. Now, when I say about this changing space, you know, in one of my articles, I have detailed it out, text, context, and interpreter, which I shared it with you. So here again, you know, right, Dr. Arshiya, she mentioned about, you know, how in an organic way the parampara has taken, you know, embraced the changes. So coming in touch with various physical spaces and various social realities, the Hotra itself, the Hotra masters themselves had shown us a way to how to embrace change. So this entire contact of with the physical space, new things have emerged back. I mean, in during you know, our historical days when things have started emerging, and even today it's happening. So there has been an organic growth. So I never see it as a challenge, but take this as a path of the journey. Now, saying so, I would just like to refer to some of the steps with which Hotra themselves, you know, the Hotra masters themselves have taken. So when there was an invitation to present the ritual art form to the royal court of Ahoms, the masters sat together and they worked on a new dance number. I mentioned about Salinas. So Salinas was an addition to the theatrical repertoire of dance, and gradually we had an independent dance. And then the Hotra masters worked on developing that independent core of dancing. Now, when this new space came, so they started thinking about choreographing a new piece, and that's where we have Rosa Ghoria Salinas. And again, coming back to the Hotra at a later point, that also became a ritual. Now, once it became a ritual, and when the mandate came to constantly present the art form, so there again has been a new thought process and reworking. And today we have a volume of Razaghoriya Salinas. It's a huge volume. So what I meant that all these guiding things have been shown by the practitioners themselves. Also outside the ritual context, apart from the Ahom kingdom space, invitations were there to the Hotra masters to present on various proscenium platforms. So the first awardee in the field of Hotriya dance, Sangeet Natak Academy awardee, Moniram Dr. Mukhtiar. So we refer to him with respect as Koka, and he is my Adhyapak's Adhyapak. So the invitation, and during his time when he was leading the Hotra as one of the principal, master, and not only that, as a Muktiyar. Muktiyar is someone who takes care of the entire and represents the Hotra in various spaces outside this Hotra space. So invitation came to him, and he represented Kamalabari Satra in various urban spaces, urban platforms, be it in Chandigarh, be it in New Delhi, so there have been references to that. So that whole curation from that ritual number, how to curate a number and present it on a secular platform, that designing, that thought process has already been shown by these great masters. Following that, again, the learning of women, where women participation, that again had been shown by the path had been shown by the masters themselves, and we have historical references to that too. When the Gormur Hotradhikar means the spiritual head who leads the Satra. So he had taken the initiative in including women participants in the entire Ras. So that has been one of the references. Another reference is that to my Adhyapak, who was then residing in the Hotra. So then the Satradhikar, he invited Adhyapak to teach some girls in his Boha. So these references, it's not something that has started all of a sudden. The Hotra themselves, in all these major steps, have taken the first step in showing out the path where the extended family, today we consider as extended family of the Hotra. So we as extended family of Kamalabari Satra, we have been following those paths. Now, this is interesting. So I never see that as a challenge. Now, one thing, of course, you can mention it as a challenge to design the whole 3 hours or whole night performance into a sort of, which has been happening in many of the traditional performance presentations. Take the example of Kuriyatam. It happens for so many days, but now, in a present situation, you have to cut it short. So those things have been there. Also, some of the dance numbers are not presented outside. These are exclusively presented only as a ritual. References to that are like Bor Probekor Nas, which is a belief that Bor Probekor Nas is an entry dance sequence of Lord Krishna. So that is done in the midnight. And even today, it's not presented, even if we are, if someone is trained in that, we are not allowed, or one never goes beyond that ritual context. So some of the exclusive dance numbers are there, which are presented only as a ritual, and we respect that space. So we as extended family of the Kamalabari Hotra practice, we have been following those path lines and trying to extend those paths into newer spaces, which again, in terms, sometimes it helps us in creating new narratives which evolve in communication with the new space.
Thank you for that answer, Anwesa. Maha, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, my question is for Arshiya ji again. Because your work has looked at Sattriya from a political lens, can you tell us more on this aspect of Sattriya. You have to unmute, Arshiya.
Yes. So, you know, I presume that Aranyani's father was my professor in JMU. So I have studied political science from the finest people, and they have really put that strong political lens and filter into my head. And I just cannot help but see the political. And, you know, when it comes to the nation, there is nothing more fascinating than how it uses politics. Okay. So we know that Arjuna Padurai referred to the nation as a cultural construct. Okay. And Homi Bhabha goes a little beyond it and says that the nation is built on narrations and narratives and narrations. Okay. So obviously, when it comes to post-independence life, I have much by way of politics, but I can't ignore the fact that politics is part of Sattriya's history from the very first moment. Sattriya is actually, the Sattriya culture is actually a culture of quiet resistance to the establishment. It rejected the then power structure of the establishment, the kingdom of the Ahoms, for instance. It rejected the caste system. It rejected the Corvi labor system that the Ahoms had set up, which, by the way, in the story of Sattriya, there are 3 L's that you will see playing very often, okay? And they are land, labor, and law. I won't talk about it too much now because that really is the fascinating part of the work that I did. But broadly, every time I come to one of those, I'll do this, L, kind of a thing. Yeah, so the fact that labor was the big issue, why the Ahoms had the Corvi labor system in place, because you needed to work labor. And we later see how the migration is also to a great extent driven by labor. And today, some of the problems that Assam is having with citizenship are also labor and land questions, labor, land, and law questions. So every time you're looking at Assam, you're looking also at labor, land, and law questions. Okay. So I've mentioned to you how the Ahom period, we had this political lens that you can use. But now, if I were to come to contemporary times, let's just say that in 1958, when the first time the demand comes up to make Sattriya, I recognize it as a classical dance form, but it gets recognized only in 2000. The question to ask is, why not? Why did it take so long? And why then in 2000? So there are 2 questions really to it. So why did it take so long? Because Assam was on the blind spot of India by then. Early, again, land, labor, and law is going to come up. Early in India's independence thing, the first Gopinath Bordoloi, had a conflict with then Prime Minister Nehru when he said that Assam cannot take any more people coming in, refugees and immigration. And he said, if Assam cannot, then no other part of India can. And if this is your attitude, then remember development, you will have to pay a price. So Assam's development suffers to a great deal because Assam fell on the blind spot of India. That is one of the reasons why it was not recognized. As you moved beyond 58 and you come into the 60s, you see Assam suffering many other injuries. One of the first injury was the 1962 China war and the abandonment of Assam, the famous radio address by Mr. Nehru saying, "My heart bleeds for the people of Assam," and Assam thought, have we been abandoned? And abandonment is a very strong emotional thing. And throughout my interviews, that year was always mentioned, 1950. The very next year, a huge process begins. At one point of time, Assam was the largest state in the region, and it had Assam, Manipur, and Tripura as the three states. But from 1963, in an attempt to appease other people's identity problems and identity issues, Assam gets balkanized. 1963, Nagaland is pulled out of it. A problem that is still continuing, a border jurisdiction issue that is still continuing. 1972, Manipur gets carved out of Assam. So like this, Assam's boundaries really settle in 1987, and we know from recent incidents that they are still not entirely settled. So the balkanization of Assam was yet another injury. The third was that before independence, the GDP of Assam was ahead of the average national GDP. But you come into the 70s, the GDP has fallen. Assam is not even being allowed to take benefit out of its own resources. So oil is being dug out from Digboy, but no refinery is established there. The oil is taken to Baroni. Why? Security. Because it is on the margins, it is a frontier province. It can be attacked and pipelines can be at risk, but that pipeline and installations can be at risk, but the pipeline was not at risk. So this was a whole worry. The economy was tanking, and what was the result? From 1979 onwards, there was a Assam agitation that happened. Okay, in the 1979, when the Assam agitation happened, at the Ranghar, which was the Ahom, what could I call it? Entertainment center, the Alpha was formed. The Alpha had a very clear agenda of secession from India, get Assam seceded from India. And so it was a hit at the idea of the nation. It could not succeed. Mrs. Gandhi, during her tenure, kept a very strong hand on things and kept it a strong political thing. No solution got formed. In 1984, after she died and Mr. Rajiv Gandhi came as a new prime minister, there was a brand new opportunity for something to be done. And that something was the Assam Accord. It was rapidly put together. And so I say that this was yet another appeasement of Assam, and in that, clause 5, 6, and 7 in Assam Accord are critical. Clause 6 is the culture clause. It says that they will now establish constitutional, legislative, and administrative efforts to protect, preserve, and promote the cultural, linguistic identity and heritage. These are actually the real words. It's just come back to me as a flash of Assam. 7 was the economic development, in infrastructure and economic development. Keep that in mind. And 5 is the troublesome clause. It continues to trouble, was the clause on the foreigners issue, that too many people were migrating into Assam and taking away the resources of Assam. So from 1985 onwards, for some years, that is from 1986 to 91, not much movement happened, although in power in Assam was the AGP government. That was the government that had been created out of the signatories of the Assam Accord. Young students from the Assam, Students Union, All Assam Students Union, Mr. Mahanta, Fukan, all these people, the young government, everybody, the age was just some 30 or 32 or something like that. He went on to become the youngest chief minister of any state, but they lack of experience. They were not able to convert any of the clauses of the Assam Accord into a reality. There was more anger, more bitterness. Nothing seemed to be resolved. All of Assam was feeling maybe the Alpha way is the right way, because we are still not getting our cultural aspirations or any of our other aspirations put into thing. Then by the 90s, especially the latter half, 1990, we have in the center, Mr. Vajpayee's government, and in Assam, the second AGP government. And this time the governor is a military man, General Sinha, and he's a great historian, and he has a vision of converting Assam's cultural life into its strength. He identifies 3 icons: Lachit Borphukan, if I were to speak chronologically, Sriman Shankardev as the great icon, and so many things get developed around Sriman Shankardev, the Sriman Shankardev Kalakshetra, including the recognition of the dance. Then Lachit Borphukan, the great general of Assam, a sword of honor is introduced in the NDA and all that, and Gopinath Bordoloi. And that's the reason you have Gopinath Bordoloi International Airport, the Guwahati airport. But if I were to come, in keeping with point 7, they set up the Numaligarh refinery, they set up IIT Guwahati, where Anwesa was artist in residence. And is that the right thing, Anwesa? You can just nod your head. Okay. And they have Tezpur University as a central university. In Silchar, they have the Assam University, Silchar. In that reckoning, they also recognize the dance. At that time, things appear to be going well because heading Sangeet Natak Academy, which is the agency that recognizes it, is Bhupen Hazarika as our chairman. So you have a man from Assam, somebody who can carry everybody else with him, and this recognition flies through. Okay. Yeah. But something is very important that is happening, which you cannot see. And I introduced the concept here of I.L. Weisman's idea of verticality of politics. So don't look only at what you're seeing on top, dig a little deeper, okay? And you have heard about the secret killings. And if you haven't, I'm not surprised, even I hadn't heard about it. I was actually looking, I was an Assam watcher and I hadn't heard about it. Why? Because it was not reported in the media. National media, zero, local media, a little bit, mostly in Assamese. At that time, I was not that involved, but I was following it. But literature started carrying it. And I draw your attention to a story called Horu Dhimali, Bod Dhimali. Minor preludes, major preludes. Dhimali is the opening item of the Sattriya dance. And it was written by Jahrul Islam, and a story that was published in 2000. 2000 is a date that comes to mind immediately as the date of the recognition of the dance form. What did the story tell you? The story starts with telling you about how children play imitating the bhavna performance. So it's dance, they are reciting the bowls, they're making the movements, they're playing on the banks of the river. And then down comes floating a bullet-ridden body with all name tags removed. This is the classic pattern of the secret killings of Assam. You cannot but see the layer, the verticality layer, you know, that on stage, you were staging Sattriya, but underground in unreported histories, recent histories of Assam, encounters were being staged. So I always talk about staged encounters and staged Sattriya happening exactly at the same time. Okay.
Dr. Arshiya, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but who is getting secretly killed? Who was getting secretly killed?
So Alpha, because I told you that Alpha was still alive, and in fact, Alpha had suddenly risen in importance again. So they were Alpha people, family members of Alpha. How do you flush out this amazingly invisible organization that seems to be attracting the attention of the Assamese people? But, you know, it's a slap on the face of the state. That is why state politics comes into play at the same time. So to assure the people that it was normal and happy times, Sattriya gets staged on the upper level. But the actual reality was that encounters were being staged at the subterranean level, you know. And this story just woke me up. It shook me when I read it. The date of publication is 2000 and everything is happening at about the same time. So in the moment of, interestingly, at the moment of recognition also, there is a little play of politics happening. For the first time, a general body meeting of the Sangeet Natak Academy is taken out of Delhi and taken to Guwahati in an act of tokenism. And there it is announced that Sattriya will get recognition. Do you see the event? This event culture that we are now so familiar with is actually happening in 2000 as well. And I talked about appeasing, but I say that this is appeasing with a little stab in it as well, because the words, so the then Secretary Jayant Kastwar announces the Sattriya's recognition thing, and he says that Sattriya is going to be recognized, hear my words, as a major dance tradition of India, at par with other major dance traditions of India, like Bharatnatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri, and blah, 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 blah. So my question to Jayant was, did you just promote Sattriya, or did you demote the other dances? Or have you played appeasement politics again with Assam? Because while they did not say the word classical, they begin imposing now on Sattriya everything that is in the name of the nation. If you have to be validated and projected at the level of the nation, you have to play the script of the nation. So Sanskritize the nomenclature, speak in Hindi at least. Anwesa's Adhyapak was addressing the Nritya Parv seminar, and he was speaking in Assamese because that's the language he knows best. And he was told, change the language. You are now speaking for the nation. Many such injuries begin a whole new set of injuries. And I think that's the story I have to tell you when I answer this question. But, very important. And I don't know why Anwesa is not here. Anwesa, I need you back, please. I want Anwesa to tell you that everything above the ground wasn't as sordid as I'm making it out to be, okay? With bodies coming floating down the river and all that, because there was an enthusiasm in amongst the community of dancers and dance scholars about, you know, how that moment of recognition was being built up to. Professor Maheshwar Nyog, the big scholar on Assamese culture, actually the one who has opened Assamese culture for our generation through his enormous writings, or Raseswar Saikia Borbayan, one of the monks from a Kamlabari Satra, who was actually expelled from the Satra for being the first to teach women. That was then, this is now, kind of a thing. These people were in the lead of it. Unfortunately, Nyog and Raseswar Saikia died just before the recognition. But Anwesa's father, Professor Pradeep Jyoti Mahanta, Anwesa's Adhyapak, you know that they don't say Guru in the Assamese tradition. Guru are Srimad Shankardev and Srimad Madhav Dev, but your teacher is called Adhyapak. Okay, so Anwesa's Adhyapak played a very critical role in the build-up to this process. And I wanted her to talk about it, and I don't know.
Yeah, let me just, Anwesa, are you there? Or have you just turned off your, there she is. She is. No, she's having some internet connection issues. So I think that's why.
Are you okay, Anwesa? Will you be able to talk about the...
Yes, I hope so. By the internet supports. Yeah, it's been going and coming. Yeah. So sorry, I missed some parts of it. So if you could just give me a cue of it.
No, I just said that while I have related some rather sordid stories of what was happening in at the subterranean level, the level that we weren't seeing, we don't normally see. But if you take the verticality of politics, we have to take it into account. What we see is the above the ground thing. And there was an enthusiasm and there was a build-up. And I talked about how your Adhyapak, your father, and you know, your Uncle Jagannath Mahanta, all of them played such key roles at that time. Talk a little bit about the enthusiasm of the time, and then I'd like to end it off with something.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the whole process, if I have to narrate about this entire thing, it takes me back to my childhood days. where I was, in fact, a privileged onlooker, because I never knew that this would be, something so important that is happening and changing the entire course of history, especially in the field of our dance tradition. Well, it takes me to that, to the days when my father, Professor Pradeep Jyoti Mahanta, he was discussing elaborately with Professor Maheshwar Nayak about various aspects of Sattriya dance tradition and to create new spaces so that this dance tradition can come to more limelight. And this is how Forum for Sankardeva Studies in 1988 or 87 it was formed, and Professor Maheshwar Nayak was the chairperson. And since then, the Forum for Sankardeva Studies had been scheduling, organizing lectures, and at the same time trying to feature Sattriya dance tradition outside Assam. So one of the very important presentations that happened was in Vishwa Bharati, Shantiniketan, and a whole lot of people from Sattriya, from the Satra, Adhyapak leading the entire group. Solo presentations were also happening along with the, Gayan band, orchestral presentation with Khol. So a whole lot of enthusiasm and the discussion about Sattriya getting featured in various spaces was already happening. And then at a later point, I also remember, the collaboration between my father and my Adhyapak. So it was such a beautiful collaboration. And with that collaboration, few new narratives, performance narratives emerged. The entire presentation of Gayan Bayan. So Gayan Bayan, again, I repeat, it's an orchestral presentation of khol and cymbals. So when the when the performers play the khol, they also dance to it. So there's a whole sequence, I think, of Dr. Sethi, she might have referred to Dhemali. So Dhemali is the ritual presentation, and Gayan Bayan is how they had sequenced it and presented it. So there was a whole set of presentation and representation of these traditional dance numbers in newer spaces. And the collaboration of Adhyapak and Professor Mahanta, my dad, it was immensely of great it brought a change. Also, they worked together in presenting solo khol sequence, from that entire whole, keeping the prasanga. See, when I'm saying this, everything, each and every sequence, it has a huge cue, it's part of a prasanga. Prasanga is a musical session assembly where it's presented with it's orchestrated with music, tal, and khol. So it's a long session. From that prasanga ceremony, they had sequenced it, they had planned it and curated it, a short mini version of solo khol presentation, keeping in view, keeping in line with the prasanga thing. So all these things they had worked on, and also regarding solo presentations, they both worked on it. So this was a very beautiful collaboration, and that had brought in a huge change in the entire performance structure outside the ritual corpus of hot representation. So again, the whole thing of presentation and representation comes here. Later, when the Dr. Sethi mentioned about the recognition part, while the entire political lens has been happening here, a lot of enthusiasm was there amidst the practitioners, because something, it's about it's about a cultural identity, and that is what everyone related to it. So sweat and labor, all that I could remember. And the entire dossier for that was prepared by my father, and the whole discussions I remember with the great masters, Professor Holkia Borban, him, then Dr. Jagannath Mahanta, my Adhyapak, they all sat together. Also Jatin Goswami himself, he is also a very senior, great master of the tradition. So all those masters, they sat together, worked on it, and finally the dossier came out. Also, just before the presentation, 15 November 2000, there was 3-day consecutive national seminar where the practitioners were asked to, gave their papers. Also, the presentations by the Sattriya performers happened. And for all these presentations, everyone gave their, it's something which is related to cultural identity, and this you could, you can imagine how much those events are of great importance for the practitioners. So everyone, all I could remember was the energy, the dynamic, energy which all the practitioners had put. And even I remember the entire presentation of Adhyapak on the day of 2000, when the Gayan band was presented. He brought all the masters from different satras. They all sat together. They worked on the entire rehearsal as a group work. And what came out was, unparalleled presentation, which even people today talk about it. So what the entire process of recognition leaves in the mind and in my memory is the sweat and labor, hard work, and how the masters sat together to frame it up. Yeah.
So I'd like to just get the last word in after Anwesa has told us this wonderful story. And by itself, this is subject for a PhD because the fine nuances yet have to come out. But again, if I were to look at it from the political lens, I look at it and I say, oh, I see Foucault's governmentality at work, because all the seminars and everything gets funded from the center, which is now desperately trying to tick off the promises of the accord. How to do it? They looked around 42 years, they don't recognize the dance. The question to ask is that, was this recognition not happening because of because the center did not valorize the art or did not value the art? So all of a sudden now these processes start taking place, and on the 15th of November this dramatic announcement is made, and and under the name of Bhupen Hazarika, the dance gets recognized, which also accounts for the legendary status. He always had a legendary status, but now it had become at another level, because identity, how you want people to, how you want to project yourself and how you want people to see you becomes important. As a bearer of a classical dance tradition, you are a nation builder. You represent the nation. You're not just one of the many. Remember, we are actually dealing with a big process going on about unity and diversity. The pluralism of India is talking about diversity, and the classicism of the few arts is talking about that unity. So you have just from the many plural, many diversities, you have slipped into a privileged category of a classical dance. Do I think that this was the best thing that could have happened to Sattriya? I feel that given the many changes that were being compelled, it is a bit of a double-edged sword. This nomenclature, speak in Hindi, speak in English, you now represent the nation kind of a thing. And having important people's whims and fancies being imposed without understanding that there's such a deep philosophy that underpins the art form. So somebody recommending that, after all, Sattriya is a bhakti-oriented dance. It doesn't go razzle-dazzle, but other forms go razzle-dazzle. So somebody from another dance tradition turns around and says, what is this? Why aren't you bringing the energy of the goddess? Because the Vaishnav movement was in a way contra to the goddess movement of Assam. So you need to understand so that everything rings true, that you don't ask for impossibles to come together. Mercifully, the goddess tradition remains a rich tradition in Assam, but it hasn't really impacted the Sattriya tradition as had been suggested in that one maverick moment. Okay, this is it.
Thank you, Dr. Arshiya. We just have two more questions. And actually, I was just looking at the time. It's already 7:15. We are an interactive platform. So we do, and we're already getting some questions coming in from viewers. So I just request both of our speakers today to keep the answers to the following questions, shorter, just so that we can have a lively interaction as well. So our next question is for Anwesa again. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what you said in your paper about interpretative paradigms of text and context with regard to Sattriya?
Okay, Aranyani, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think to some extent I have already covered about presentation and representation. You know, and also Dr. Arshiya mentioned that about organic changes which have been embraced by the tradition. See, a tradition flourishes or flowers with constant interpretation, and I see every new narrative or each narrative which the master had worked in touch with a new space has been a contribution, has been an interpretation from the ground, which was already available. So what we have been seeing, that there has been constant shifting of spaces in the entire history of Sattriya. It will be too short to sum it up right now, and if it's available, you can and then you can share it with our art lovers, that entire write-up which discusses in details about this entire contextualization and recontextualization. So here in the entire history also, in my previous answers, I have mentioned that how from, getting presented in the first Harigriha or Rangagriha, again getting transformed into ritual, and from that ritual again traveling to a new space. So you can imagine when there's a change of the space. So now from saying here, in a Namghar, it's a rectangular space where people are sitting all in the three sides, and sanctum sanctorum in the center. And when you are presenting that art form in the unidimensional stage, you can see this change it has to embrace. In the entire performance structure, all these changes have been embraced, and new interpretations have emerged, be it in the field of costume, be it in the field of music, be it in the field of entire presentation setup. Because now you don't see, starting with Gayan by, Rag Reponi before each dance number, following pure dance sequence and guitar nas and melanas all together at one go. You are not given that kind of time. But now when you're presenting it here, instead of that Rag Reponi, Vandana, taking the literature from Madhav Deva or from Bhakti literature or Srimanta Hankodev, those literary narratives are used. Sometimes it's not used because it's a new thing. So it's not used because the first movement itself is invocation of the space itself, Jinthak, the entry movement. Such are, each movement is philosophized in our tradition. So everything gets a curated version in that representation and in that interpretative space. So with the changing space, new narratives are emerging. And even today, when you talk to every, different practitioners who are traveling to various spaces and coming in touch with the new physical spaces, they are creating new interpretative narratives, but keeping the entire core essence of Sattriya. Now, one thing I have mentioned in that write-up itself, it's the responsibility of the practitioner, how that practitioner interprets the entire tradition. Like Dr. Arshiya Sethi said, the entire jhalak of the Sattriya you get to see it in the eyes itself, in the first basic stance itself. So right from the first basic stance, the whole journey of the interpretation of 600 years old oral memory, body memory, and everything you want to say, the living memory and the public memory too, gets represented in that interpretative piece.
Thank you for that. Maha, let's ask the
Yeah,
final.
this is our last question for before we open it out for the discussions. So we'll try to keep it short so that we can. There's already a question. So the question I had, yes, I maybe wanted to say something.
I was just saying that I have more than one question already.
Okay, there's more than one question. Yeah. So yeah, my question is, in your writing, there is a mention about the internationalization of the art. So can you discuss what you mean by internationalization and its impact?
It has been only 21 years on the 15th of November 2021, not very far away, that this dance has been in the classical framework. And the remarkable thing about this dance is it has a disproportionate international presence, very dramatic, the finest stages, etc. Yet the first international trip that happens does not happen post-recognition, but happens as early as 1975, when Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed was the president of India, and he takes a trip on one of his state visits to Indonesia. He carries a Satra group with him. That group consisted of Satra monks as well as non-monks. Amongst the Satra monks was Balaram Borbayan, who is the uncle of Habanand Borbayan, also a Yuva awardee and one of the bright sparks of the Sattriya tradition. Present in the group then was Sharadi Saikya, the very well-known Sattriya dancer. This is 1975. But the real energy begins towards the 90s when Indira P.P. Bora, along with her daughter, Menaka Bora, who is now working towards enrolling for a PhD in London and things like that, they keep making many trips. So many private trips get made by well-known dancers. Some ICCR trips get made, but naturally they are made after the recognition has happened. So from, I think, 2008 onwards, you have ICCR also supporting travel by Sattriya art dancers. Anwesa herself went to many places. She also got the Charles Wallace and was able to carry her work there. So another area we see a very dramatic presence of Sattriya, and the international thing is in dance scholarship. But I would rapidly like to focus the light on one journey. Anwesa's Adhyapak also goes on 2 occasions overseas. And so people are now moving around. And this is the monks of Majuli. So while in India, the monk is being sidelined and marginalized, overseas, the monk is getting a higher valorization. And it is again the theory that Susan Reed had talked about in her book, Dance in the Nation, which talked about Sri Lanka. And it came out as I was writing. So I had the benefit of, you think, having had her thoughts to build on. And she says that there is the role of 2 types of people: an elite within your country and some foreigners. So the elite within the country included Maheshwar Nyog and people like that, who brought it up to a level. But now the play of foreigners comes into play, and the monks of Majuli are discovered in a way by 2 French people. One is just an inveterate traveler, and the other, and she runs a sort of travel company kind of thing. And the other is an arts aficionado who works with modern visual arts. So the traveler is Nadine Delpech, and the arts aficionado is a guy called Matthias Coulange. They just get fascinated by the Sattriya culture, live in Majuli over many years, like not continuously, but visiting it over many years. They work with the monks, they create local infrastructure, a little lending library and all that. But at the same time, they are trying to make breakthroughs in the festival circuit in Europe, for instance. And in 2008, for the first time, 10 invitations come to the monks of Majuli, and they make the effort through a private thing it means a lot because, you know, the structure of the Satra is fairly disciplined. So you can't just up and go and things like that. And if you're going to carry more than one person, you have to have the permission of the Satradhikar and all that. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done. But the reception to the monks of Majuli was just phenomenal. And from 2008 onwards, they fascinated the world, particularly Europe, particularly within Europe, France. They worked with the Cirque du Soleil, they worked with Arta, they worked with Paris 8 University, that is the University of Michel Foucault, you know. So, and eventually by 2010, I think the university started a course on Sattriya. So Bhabanan Borbayan, with his little dodgy English speaking skills, was managing to conduct this class which somebody else translated for him, and people were learning and dancing. He worked with the Bilesh Institute and actually created Parijat Haran, now recited instead of Assamese, Brajavali and Sanskrit in French. And when it was, are we okay? When it was presented in Majuli for the first time, imagine, no one knew French there, you know, but there was just a lot of reception. Okay, so there was a lot, much thrill around it. But I draw your attention to one very interesting thing. At Music Gime, accidentally, they got a chance, Bhavanand himself first alone, got a chance to see a fabric called Vrindavani Vastra. Now, Vrindavani Vastra is part of Sattriya history because it is a weaving, lampas weaving tradition, which it is believed that the first such work of the Vrindavani Vastra was done in the Kok kingdom when Sriman Shankardev was having issues with the Ahoms. He had to escape into the Koch kingdom, and there he worked on this fabric, which had scenes from the life of Krishna woven into it. And suddenly they find this one piece. Historically, it is not that Vrindavani Vastra in which Sriman Shankardev, but it is a similar sort of a thing, you know. And I have seen pictures of the monks going there and getting so bhavok, you know, emotional at the fact that they are seeing something similar. And then eventually they look at that costume and a new production gets created, Vrindavani Vastra, which takes forward again in an organic manner the mask tradition of Sattriya into a totally different way, where the crown is worn and the mask is made as part of the crown, you know. So there are changes that are happening, but it sort of looks okay. And when it was presented the first time round with a group of 70, I think 70 performers in Majuli, and the traveling group is only 10 performers, and if the reaction was complete silence. And then the first, then they said, it's everything is different, but it is good. This is that peer approval, which actually has a name in the Sattriya tradition. It's called Mahaladya, which is actually a peer review kind of a thing. And so the dance just grew a little more. And then eventually they found that not just Music Gime, but the British Museum has 11 panels of this Vrindavani Vastra. Obviously, it's not the same sacred Vrindavani Vastra, but it is a Vrindavani. You may ask me, how do the British get it? That's a story by itself. For some other day, I might tell you that story, but it gets, so it's on display. And the artists are called to perform. Anwesa is there as a Charles Wallace Fellow. She joins the panel. I am invited to come and, moderate that panel. And suddenly all over the place, there's a buzz about Sattriya culture, whether it is the fabric, why are the monks making it? Because as somebody said, as Matthias Coulange said, this is his words, there is the smell of the cow in them. Because they are farmer dancers, and this age of so much protest against farmers, I reiterate this. They are farmer dancers who do all of this. The last time that I encountered one of their international trips, now they had moved across the Atlantic Ocean to America, and who was their sponsor? The Pew Research Center. So not some SVSA kind of thing, but top agencies are promoting them. So in scholarship, both Anwesa and I have read papers at international dance conferences. I have also read at the South Asia conference twice on some aspect of Sattriya, kind of thing. So it's becoming part of, so I say that the internationalization is really rapid. Sattriya may not have moved to so many cities of India as yet. And most practitioners of Sattriya are Assamese, people of Assamese origin. But overseas, we now have the Mexican girl who dances it. We have Perrine who dances it. We have, what's her name? Beautiful name she has. Willow, who dances it in America. So suddenly, you have this whole internationalization that's happening. All the Beliche artists learn the dance as well, So there's a huge internationalization happening, which is a pleasure to see this. Okay, I hope this is right.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to our final. Actually, Maha, can you speak? My dog is.
Yeah. We go to be open to the audience, or yeah. So is there anybody who wants to unmute and ask? There are questions from Babina and
yeah. Actually, sorry, she stopped barking, so now I can talk. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there was actually a question from somebody called Nalin Jain. I don't know if they're still here, but yeah, but yeah. Oh, yes, Nalin. Yeah. Nalin, would you like
friend of mine?
Okay, Nalin, would you like to start your video and ask a question? Ask your question. Okay, I'm not sure if he's there.
So meanwhile, while Nalin gets organized, why don't we take this question of Babina's?
Yeah, just a second. No, actually, because I think he did tell me that he would have to leave. So maybe he's not logged off yet, but he's leaving. And this is a question there's a question for Anwesa about, he's saying she's discussing about the changes and organic growth. Is it possible to identify two major changes, dance form or spiritual dimension, since the time the dance began? And then we'll move on to Babina. I hope you're there, Babina, to ask the question yourself.
Yeah. Two major change, which I referred to also during the talk, was one, bringing to the Ahom court itself by the Sattriya practitioners, and introducing a new dance number, and later on that dance number again getting introduced as a ritual. So how this entire interpretation, it's a cycle, from one space it traveled to another, and again coming back to the ritual. So that again taking another important change which happened and which we see very much right now also, the costume. Traditionally, each and every dance number, we have a different separate costume. Say, name a dance number like Bahanas, we have a separate costume. Salinas, again, a separate costume. And here, Sattriya dance, we have, again, specific male dance numbers and female dance numbers. Right from the basic stance itself, we have the Purushora and Prakriti-ora. So getting divided the entire repertoire into Prakriti and Purusha, we have again several different sets of costumes. Now, when this dance form started getting presented on proscenium, there was a concept of ekaharya, because it's not possible for one dancer to constantly change into Purusha, like in the Purusha dance numbers also we have separate costumes. So it's not possible for a dancer to constantly change the dance costume. So the ekaharya concept was developed again sitting with the Sattriya practitioners, the scholars, and also the practitioners who are not directly from the Satras. They all sat together and worked on the costume. And today we have, when we present the male dance numbers, we wear the dhoti and the bukusula. The headgear is very important in our tradition, so we wear a pagudi. Coming to the female costume, so instead of cotton skirts, now the traditional silk textile that is worn, and then headgear is also important, traditional jewelry, all those are worn. So you can see that the whole concept of ekaharya was accepted, and today it's part. But if you go to the Satra and want to see a ritual presentation of Salinas, you will see that same cotton skirt and Bupusala. But when you come outside, it could be the same Ramdani, but represented in a different costume. So these are like two major changes, which if I have to name,
yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Anwesa.
Yes.
If you were to look at the sociology, one of the most startling change is the gendered change. It was earlier men who were dancing it. Today, it is women. So what has happened is that, first of all, the transgender artistry that was involved earlier when the men were dancing it was constant, because they had to play all the female roles also and do the female dancing, Sali, Rajagariya Sali, and all the other dances. In the case of women dancing on secular stages, it is easier for them to do the women's pieces. Very few women dance the male thing. So there could be the transgender artistry even on stage, but it is much less. Anwesa dances it, but you see, you have to be very fit to be able to do those things. That means you need to do your Mati Akharas really well, which are the building blocks of the dance, like literally yogic exercises, And I find today the guru's not teaching them. Kosuka is the first step in the Satra, where a little bit like the Kathakali massage, the guru presses the back of the student and makes them realize the power of their spine, the connection with the earth, and how breath can be a shield. Breath can be resistance, kind of a thing. This is now not being worked on so much, because as a very well-known guru turned around and told me that women are so much more delicate. How can I put pressure on her back like that? So you are then diluting the dance. It's my fear.
All right.
Gender change is, when did the change happen? Like the chronology.
So the first time that you have women dancing it, as Anwesa mentioned, it was the Gormur Satra's Ras. That happens in 1950, the women start coming in. And if my memory serves me correctly, and I may be mistaken on the name, I think it was Bhanu Deka who was the first girl who danced anything. But you see, these can be like two girls going at the same time. Who is the first, who is the second, kya malum. But now it is quite startling. In 2014, I think I had a conversation with Naren Barua, who was a monk, now no longer a monk. This business about celibate monks can leave the monastery, as many of them did, as Anwesa's own Adhyapak did, left the monastery, and he's teaching much more people living a normal life. He has a family, he has children, his daughter dances as well. But in, I think 2014, with Naren Barua, I had a conversation. He says, out of my 200 students, only 3 are males. If I have to do a ballet or, like a composition which needs male dancers, I have just 3 to pull out from. But then I think of Vempati Garu, and I say that he had Manju Bhargavi do the male roles. She made a fabulous Krishna. So I'm afraid then more and more girls will have to do transgender artistry, and transgender artistry is the real challenge and some beauty of Sattriya.
Here, I would just like to add one thing regarding the women performers, but we have been talking mostly about an order, celibate order Satras, like the Kamalabari Satra, but there are also another set of order of Satra, which are domestic order Satras, where the male residents, they can marry. And so it's a domestic setup. And there, women performance do play an important role. It might not be dance, because mostly dance is becomes a part of the bhavana presentation. But women, the whole course of ritual starts with I Hokolor Nam, the orchestral presentation of singing. So women performance have been playing a very important role. Apart from that, the entire education of the whole Sattriya lifestyle and Hotriya living is given by the mothers, by the women. So I have grown up seeing my grandmother playing a very important role in this center. And here it's not just only in the family, because domestic order, hot trust sustains within the village, where every village holder, they are all members of that family, of that satra. So here, if I refer to my own hotra, I personally belong to Hautkusi hotra. So if I refer to my own hotra, so the villager is also equally a member of that hotra as much as I. So here it's like, the role of the women have been playing very important. We see a very important role by women. Also, after passing away of my grandfather, who was the Satradhikar, the woman takes that role of leading the entire philosophical discourse, discussing various spiritual issues with the entire community. So here, women play a very important role. So it's very interesting, as I said earlier also, how the entire Hotra functions with the society and lives with the society. That is how it's interesting. Of course, outside, outside the Hotra context, in the urban scenario, the gateway to the entire Hotriya lifestyle is through the Angika, is through the movements. For example, if I refer to my teaching period in IIT Guwahati, we had almost most of the students were non-Assamese. So their gateway to the entire journey of Hotriya was through the Angika, was through the movements. From the movements, they traveled to the philosophy. And it was a few days ago, the student passed away and left the IIT Guwahati, and she created a piece called Majuli, because Majuli, she had never visited Majuli, but she said that she lived Majuli in that dancing space. So that is what the Angika is, the gateway where you explore the Sattvika revelation. Yeah.
Yeah. Anwesa, I think you meant that she passed out of
Out
college.
of college, right?
Passed out of, oh, sorry. Did I say that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So passed out of the college. Yeah. So she finished her PhD work. So
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry. Yeah.
No, she will have a long life. Don't worry.
Yes.
And mistakes like this get made.
Jinat, if you're here, long life, long live Jinat. Yes.
All right. So just before Babina asks her question, there was another question that she'd asked during the. It's a very short answer actually. It's just, could you repeat the name of the story published in 2000 that you mentioned earlier, Arshiya ma'am?
I wrote it down. Horudhimali Bordhimali, which
great.
Professor Amit Rahul Vaishya has translated as Minor Preludes, Major Preludes. The initial story is by Jehul Hussain.
All right. Okay, great. So then there is also, Babina, would you like to come and ask your other question? I'm trying to scroll up and trying to see.
She says the traffic noise is very bad. So she's here, but she doesn't want to open her thing because the traffic noise is very bad.
Okay. So the problem is that the question
is,
how will you find the question?
That is Debanjali's question.
Yes, there's Debanjali's question about why you said it is
So thank you very much, Debanjali, for asking that question. Actually, it's a very, very important part of my thing. But primarily, if I were to talk about some of the palpable changes that I have seen, we'll give you an example of what I was talking about. In the Sutras, male dominated. Outside the Sutras, female presence is what is important. You remember Matthew Allen Harp, you've had him as your recognizing dance scholar as well, had talked about the 6 Re's when he talked about, the reform and revival of Bharatanatyam dance tradition. So all those Re's work in the case of Sattriya. I think there are 6 of them. If you apply them, that means there is a change of population, there is a repopulation, relocation, re-agendaing, contentizing and things like that. We should actually talk a little bit about the change. Anyway, okay. So then I find Sattriya, when in the Satras, Maybe it's not so smart, but it is a little more, it's slower. It allows you to savor the bhakti aspect, comes to the stage, especially in an evening with multiple forms, or in what is nowadays very popular, that the government of India says, do a chirashnu with many side, spanda, like you have been part of that production and all that, multiple dance forms. And Sattriya then says, oh, I should spin as fast as Kathak. I should footwork as fast as somebody else. I should leap up as fast as someone else, kind of a thing. So I feel Sattriya is not just in a hurry, but it is also in what I call an imitation mode sometimes. And when it's in a hurry, some of its most defining and beautiful features, and I will mention 4 of them, dope, which is a dipping and bobbing movement like the boats of the Brahmaputra. That's the definition of it. You can't see it because everybody's in a hurry. Hali, which is a horizontal sort of a movement like that. The ula, the anti-gravitational aspect of the dance, all of which you see in Anwesa. And the last thing is Sitika, which Anwesa is very well known for. And sort of similar moment, I can tell you, of excitement is the chamak in Chow. It's that, that little, it's that exciting moment for which you need to have the time to get into and then it, And if you're dancing in this rapid fashion because you want to be, you are a wannabe Bharatanatyam, in the costume of a Satriya, you're going to lose all this out. So these are the tugs and pulls which made me think of the word schizophrenic, and the fact that, are you entertaining or are you being honest to its spiritual roots? These are some of the things that create the schizophrenic word. Maybe it's not the ideal term. Maybe I drop it. I'm not going to run a public poll on it. I'll just think a little more about it.
All right. Thank you. There's one last question for Dr. Anwesa, and that is, do you think, so it's not worded clearly enough for me to really understand what exactly it means, but I think, do all classical dance forms are related to political landscape? That's what it says. But basically, I think what it's asking is, what the question is asking is, are all classical dance forms, or do all classical dance forms have to be related to the political landscape of, I guess they're talking about, is art political? What is your opinion on that? And are all classical dance forms, do they all have this political sort of background?
See, dance is a lens, and if you use that lens, you can see you can relate every aspect of your surrounding through dance. And how can we negate politics? If dance is a major unit of society, can we negate politics? But yes, when doing a research, your own specialized work, you can focus on your particular area, and then focus on it. But can we negate our happenings surrounding us and just see dance as dance per se? If we see it as a part of as a unit of society, everything happening around society gets affected even to this major unit of social action, which is dance. It could be dance, it could be theater, it could be any form of art, any form of creative reflection. Because, I once, while seeing Ajanta Ellora caves towards the later part of Gupta dynasty, you don't see such marvel artistry there. It's very, it's compared to the other caves, where you get to see the extravagant work. And the person who was one of the historians of Asa was narrating all these illustrations of the sculpture's beauty. And he said it's because of that political reign during that time that didn't allow the artists to focus on their art. So it's dance is just a wide view, and for me, dance is a world view. So we cannot negate the happenings around, but at the same time, being a dancer, being a practitioner, being a researcher, you may choose your area of specialization and focus on it. That's how I see it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that articulate response. Dr. Arshiya, would you like to say something about this?
I think that it cannot escape. It's one of the defining lenses, just as economics is a defining lens of our arts. If you're taking, for instance, in today's time with the government being the only sponsor and wanting you to perform a particular type of dance to keep up the script of the nation, how can you not look at politics? For me, it's just impossible not to look at dance through a political lens, but I am in an acute minority.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much for, I'd like to thank both Dr. Anwesa and Dr. Arshiya for being here today and for engaging us in this very, very insightful discussion about Sattriya. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Okay, and also for all of you to all the viewers to engage with these questions and to listen to us on a Monday evening. There have been a few questions about recognizing dance and how to follow us for future events and all of that. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram. We don't have a website yet, but we're working on it. And we do have a newsletter, so you can just email us at recognizingdance@gmail.com. Maha will type it out in the chat box, and just say that you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you can get more information about our future events and everything. Anybody who sends us a request now in the coming days, we'll just send you the newsletters, the past newsletters. We've only started doing that in the month of September, so we can fill you in on everything that's been happening. Yeah, that's the only thing that I think there were some questions about that, like how do we find out more about what happens at Recognizing Dance. So thank you both very, very much. We hope that this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and that we'll get to talk more and more about different dance forms in India, and be able to engage with these issues and with all of the multiple perspectives and multiple realities that classical dance and all dance forms actually come with. So thank you both very much. And Maha, would you like to say anything?
That note, before we end, this weekend on the 9th of October, we have a reading of the Madras Devadasi Act with the High Court lawyer. We'll be discussing the Act and its implications from a legal perspective, which is going to be different for both Aranyani and myself, because we come from, all our readings have been from through sociology, politics, and dance itself. So we're really looking forward to having you all back on Saturday at 4 p.m. Aranyani? Yeah, 4 p.m. This weekend, and we will discuss the Madras Devadasi Act this weekend. So thank you all once again, and good night. I'll just stop the recording. Arshiya ji, you were saying something.
No, I just wanted to say thank you.